Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Security Conversations podcast. My guest this week is Jeremy Bannon, the principal at the Cyber Health Company. Jeremy, what is the Cyber Health Company? Let's start right there.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. We are a personal cybersecurity and online privacy firm. We dub the two of those together Cyber Health, and we work with high-risk individuals to reduce the likelihood of cyber compromise. The vast majority of our customers are corporate customers. So we partner with security teams, with CISOs, to minimize the likelihood that their executives experience a compromise outside of the corporate environment. Think personal emails, personal cell phones, personal home networks, anything that's not covered by the security team that is deemed inbound by attackers. We want to shore up those things.
Why is that such a gap in an organization? I mean, if you're a security team, you just mentioned this is something the security team generally ignores, and you're selling into the same security team to help protect their executives. Help me understand why that gap exists.
Sure. I think in a lot of ways, attackers run businesses. And I think they have realized that this is actually an economical way to hurt organizations, both from like a value adjusted standpoint. So how much money, effort, risk does it take to compromise? And that's just because I think in a lot of ways, companies have gotten more sophisticated, right? Budgets have increased. They're constantly evaluating vendors, but individuals by and large have stayed the same. This even includes the highest risk people are doing not much materially different than they were 5, 10, or even 15 years ago. And I think attackers, being sort of the enterprising group that they are constantly looking for novel ways to extract value. And I think the sort of threat landscape mixed with the defensive posture of organizations has really almost by default put these executives more in the crosshairs than they've been before.
Right. You guys are framing this personal cyber risk as business risk. Can you provide like some clear examples where like a executive personal compromise turned into a corporate incident?
Yeah. There's quite a few, I guess. The three main costs that CISOs will pay if the personal lives of one of their executives is compromised. The first is obviously the risk of a lateral attack. So could a permission be exploited, whether it's through a device or a home network or something like that?
The kind of things we're seeing now with these software supply chain attacks, where a maintainer or some sort of high privilege developer in an organization gets his thing compromised and there's a pivot. So you're saying there's some executives, CEOs, CFOs, those kinds of folks where they're pivot points as well.
Yeah, I mean, it could be anyone. It's hard to say exactly who is like the exact employee that we want to protect more than others, but obviously, anyone with elevated permission or even access to material non-public information, right? We work with a lot of public companies is inbounds for attackers and therefore is something that's worth protecting. I think in a lot of ways we frame what we do as being like the moat beyond your castle, right? Like security teams have threat intelligence to go look for open source information to find indications of compromise. We just sort of take that in a slightly different direction, but a very, very similar concept. Just because it's not in your perimeter now doesn't mean it's not interesting to you. And so we extend a lot of the same principles that companies spend millions of dollars on, but just aren't looking in these particular cases. And I think like a great example of this is actually the Disney hack from a couple of years ago, where a senior employee downloaded a like gaming mod for, just something that they were passionate about personally. And they had Slack on their personal computer. And the attacker pivoted into that Slack instance. There was obviously the employee was terminated, sued for wrongful termination. There was a class action lawsuit by the employees whose data was leaked as a part of that Slack compromise. And actually, I think the most expensive thing was Disney ripped out Slack of the entire organization, sort of in response to that incident. So we definitely think about, hey, if you have a senior leader who's compromised personally, like that is an attacker on the doorstep of your sort of environment, and that's worth investing in proactively to minimize the likelihood that those lateral attacks happen. Now, the second thing that CISOs care about is reputational risk. So executives are often highly correlated with their employers, especially true for consumer brands that, traffic in their reputation. Famous case here, honestly, is the Jefferies CEO, Rich Handler, had a personal Instagram that was compromised. He was very reputable about showing how back to office they were, sort of post-pandemic. there was a crypto scam posted on his personal Instagram. Their stock was down intraday. They had to issue public statements on CNBC to stop the bleeding. I mean, I can promise you a lot of people did not work that day.
Of an Instagram compromise.
Correct. Personal Instagram, like his personal Instagram account that was public, right? And I'm sure it lacked proper MFA, right? And then I think the last thing is, even when an executive's personal compromise is completely unrelated to the company, take something like identity theft, where someone takes out a credit card or a home equity line or something like that. There's like an executive productivity loss, right? Where an executive is filing police reports, right? Calling their banker, trying to get money back that was stolen with no impact to the company, but you're losing your key people for days at a time to deal with these types of things. Even if they're at work, they're distracted, they're waiting for callbacks, they're perhaps postponing travel, interviews, new business development, et cetera. But these are your most important people. They're worth tens of thousands of dollars per day in productivity. And even if it's completely unrelated to the company, like, these preventable problems are worth investing in sort of proactively. And we think we're a great partner for that.
I wonder how often are you running into conversations with your CISOs where the executives are the biggest problems? They're forwarding things to themselves. They're using WhatsApp to do like business communication. You know what I'm talking about. This kind of circumventing of IT, and then IT has no say in it because it's the CEO or it's the CFO or someone from the C-suite doing some of the dumbest shit in these organizations. Is that something you run into a lot? And how do you bridge that? I don't know what to call it.
I mean, what we would call it is senior executives are the most likely to get exceptions from policies, right? And that could even be something as simple as, I don't want to use a password manager in the company, even though it's policy. I don't want to have to multi-factor every day. It slows me down.
I'm sending things to my Gmail. I want to send things to my Gmail so I can access it easier because I'm at the lake house or something,
Correct. And we're seeing it now more with shadow AI, right? Where they want to leverage AI for personal productivity, and the organization's just not there yet. I think for us, it's very, very common that we will run into those issues where CISOs are genuinely concerned about what risks they're taking. But you're right, it's a little bit awkward when you're telling your boss what they can and cannot do. And I think for us, we're a great answer for that. Right? At the very least, we will give the senior leadership team a support resource to get some of these questions answered, which is, hey, I want to do X. I want to do it on my personal devices. How do I have this conversation with security? And we'll tell them hey, we actually think this is a great conversation to have. You should make the request. But I would say this is definitely a very, very common problem, right? Where CISOs are concerned that the basic principles are not being upheld, right outside their environment. And you're right, there is this awkwardness, right, where they can't exactly censure their boss.
You're pitching this idea of digital immunity for individuals.
Yeah.
Can you give me a sense of what that actually means in practice? Beyond better passwords and MFA and password managers, what does that real digital immunity look like?
Yeah, I think one of the most valuable things we provide to CISOs is that if there is an executive compromise on the personal side, right, something that is not their responsibility, it's outside their observable universe, it's outside the corporate environment, they still have to deal with that problem, right? For us, digital immunity is a lot about resilience. What is your capacity to respond? I think when things are a mess beforehand, we are not using password managers. We are completely behind on versions. We don't know sort of what devices were in their home network last week, right, versus what's there today. Being organized, having good inventory is a great way to increase your response time. And this is especially true for public companies that now perhaps have pressure to file a market-facing statement, right? As of the new SEC regulations from a few years ago, companies have to file 8Ks if there's a material cyber breach. Now imagine if you don't even know what's going on. I think for us, it's a huge value add where we're paying down a lot of technical debt in this category to just increase these companies' capacity to understand what's going on and respond. Not only that, but because we're a privacy-preserving support resource, executives will often come to us before they go to the company with an incident because they're not sure if it's a company or a personal matter. And we actually can give them really, really good targeted answers quickly and say, no, bring that to security immediately. That is definitely a company matter.
You guys are deliberately framing this cybersecurity as healthcare. I mean, that's the pitch, right? Correct. You're having scores, some care plans, checkups. I mean, how literally are you taking that analogy in your business model design, and where do you think it breaks down?
I think we are very intentional about it. At a brand level, we think that companies have communicated security from a explicit fear-based communication style for too long, and it's actually a little bit hollow, right? You think about the ads that run on TV or the radio. There's a hack every 30 seconds, and you could be next unless you pay us $8 a month for monitoring, right? But if I'm not compromised tomorrow, it really falls flat. We think the much more mature way to approach these types of topics is from a healthcare perspective, very similar to what you're seeing now with investments being made in longevity, proactive screening for cancer, much younger, neurological, scans, full body MRIs, et cetera. We think the exact same thing applies to security and privacy. The stakes are growing. We do think that the right way to communicate this is proactively and say, you're not going to be compromised tomorrow if you don't work with us, right? Like, I'm not saying that, that you are in imminent danger, but there are sensible investments that can be made today that greatly reduce risk going forward. And we think, again, the best way to communicate that is healthcare. The other thing I'll say, which is kind of like the double entendre here, is that in addition to thinking security and privacy are 21st century healthcare, our business model also in a lot of ways functions like a healthcare company, where it's enterprise sponsored but privacy preserving. The same way you get coverage for personal healthcare from your employer, but they're not privy to the conversations with your doctor, and it is in a lot of ways a win-win. Our business model is structured the exact same way.
You also generate cyber health score that factors in like wealth, board seats, like just identifying where the people are and who might be highest risk, right? Can you talk a little bit about how do you build and validate the weighting model, and how do you keep that calibrated as things change, threat landscape shifting, and on our feet?
Yeah, totally. I would argue that proprietary data model is the first of its kind that has accurately been able to assess cyber risk of individuals, no matter who they are, where they come from, what technology they're using, what their education background is. We can assess someone's risk very, very efficiently. We have two inputs to our cyber health score. Number one is what we call our base score. It's an apples to apples comparison comprising over 200 data points, certain things that I'm sure you would expect, right? How do you come up with a new password? What is your multi-factor adoption? Is your credit frozen?
That happens during your intake? Like, how does that happen? Correct. Is there like a 1 hour interview you sit with them and you work with them in the beginning? Like, how do you get that intake?
We do a questionnaire. It's voluntary response. Again, similar to a doctor, right? You sit in the waiting room and answer questions about your diet, right? Like, we have an intake. It takes 15 minutes. It's 70 questions. And in parallel, we run an open source intelligence research report. So we will also do an outside looking in diagnostic where we will look for...
You're simulating an attacker recon, basically.
Correct. We want to look at our members the way an attacker might. And bringing those two things together, again, similar to a healthcare professional, there's voluntary response and diagnostic. Those two things together inform our cyber health score. Now, our base score is apples to apples. So Ryan, Jeremy, anybody else who takes our assessment will be given a base score in exactly the same scale. The difference is that not every person needs the same amount of posture, right? Like needs the same amount of security, depending on who they are. And so we have a second component, which we call our cyber health coefficient, which sort of more what you were saying at the end there. It helps us understand how much risk they face on a day-to-day basis, how much wealth they have. Are they a senior executive or an assistant? Do they work for a publicly traded company or a private company? What function are they in, right? We tend to see more risk around HR, finance, right? Things that are custodying either sensitive information or financial information versus, say, marketing or sales might not be as, as in the crosshairs. And so for
that
us,
determines the weights and right.
Correct. And we actually released our first research report on it, the 2026 Cyber Health Score report. We published not just the methodology for the score, but we also actually published the before data, if you will. We anonymized sort of what is the condition of executives who come work with us today, what percentage of them have, say, Facebook accounts that are leaking information, what percentage of them use 2 phones, what percentage of them have guest Wi-Fi networks enabled at home, what percentage are using security keys versus a multi-factor app versus SMS or email for multi-factor. So for us, I think measurement is a precondition for improvement. And I think we have today like the most data-driven approach to assessing risk today for individuals.
I want to linger a little bit on this simulation, this OSINT intake thing that you just mentioned on each executive. What is the single most common thing one of these executives or your customers are surprised to learn is publicly exposed about them? Is there a single thing? Is there one thing that always stands out?
I think I do think there's one thing that does stick out, and it's the social security number. And I think there's like total misinformation around this subject today. Historically, it's been thought of as a very closely guarded piece of information, so much so that banks will validate customers using social security number. I mean, it's a critical question in a security flow. If I'm trying to validate, are you Ryan or are you someone, pretending to be Ryan? I would say in 99.9% of cases, we are able to get a social security number for one of our customers. Now, what's the implication of that, right? Like, to me, it's that you should not be using vendors who are using that as a key authentication question. If they're not offering you something beyond that, and the only thing needed to do a wire transfer or change a password is to give a social security number, I don't think you're doing your job as a security team. But we do have this very sort of like long-standing public, common knowledge, right? That social security numbers, it's secretive, right? It's something that only you could know and no one else could know it. And I think with the level of like breaches that we've had over the years, I think it's fictional that it's actually a private piece of information. That's a good measure of authentication. I wouldn't say that's something that we think is actually that big of a deal, but I would say in terms of like breaking like a sort of an old wives' tale, if you will, it's that, the social security number is this, vault that if someone gets access to it, your life is over. And I actually don't think that's the case.
What's the most common change you're implementing on an executive's behalf? When you run into a new customer all the time, is it absence of two-factor? I mean, look, I'm glad we're doing this podcast now. We're a week away from an Iranian threat actor claiming to have access to the FBI director's Gmail inbox.
Correct.
Now, I can't understand how an identity-based theft, a breach password can allow that if you have multi-factor authentication enabled. Is that something that you're surprised more and more executives aren't doing what we consider as security people the basics? Or is that you go in and nothing shocks you at how bad things are?
The last thing you said is correct. I've seen horror sort of stories, like cleanup jobs, if you will. But I would say that like outside of the industry, these problems are still very, very pervasive, where people are still using password combinations from decades ago. And yes, I would say it's very, very common that password management and multi-factor authentication, basic account security measures, are in very, very poor shape. Now, what I will also say is that these are not approachable, easy to solve problems for people who are incredibly busy, right? Like it does require investment. And oftentimes those products that are excellent, right? And I'm sure you use your personal multi-factor or password manager, if you will, of choice. I would not say those cater to average people, right? And I think that's one of the secrets of our, call it, healthcare model, is that we actually think having human beings are a feature, not a bug. This is a very, very, very high trust, sensitive relationship. The executives we work with, I can pay for a license, I can give them very clear support instructions right off the product's website, and they will not get it done. They will probably fail, even with the best of intentions, with the best effort. And for us, I think it's about being excellent.
You're combining software with this kind of concierge response, right?
We have our own, correct. We have our own sort of unifying dashboard that in a lot of ways might look like what you would consider like One Medical, right? Where it's a personalized dashboard that takes into account all different diagnostic results, right? We give them their original OSINT report, what data points we're interested in flipping.
Things can change over time.
Correct. We have a care plan. We have a care plan for them that's constantly being updated by our team to make sure that they're getting the most impact for return on their time, right? And you're right. For some people, it's basic things like password management or multi-factor. For other people, it's far more advanced.
What does the advanced look like?
We have plenty of people who are experimenting with, right, like Claude and OpenClaw today. And they're asking some of these very, very cutting edge questions. Like, I want to leverage this type of new experimental software to gain, a step function in my productivity. I need to give it access to my email. Help me do that responsibly. It's a very, very hard question today, like very hard. But I think for us, like we have to cater to people of all different technical capacities and different attitudes towards privacy. So again, for us, that's where a human being is really, really important, where we understand each one of our members in a very, very deep way to help them make great security and privacy adjusted decisions.
I'll linger there for a little bit. What actually happens
Sure.
when an executive is targeted in real time? And like, I'm just curious, like, why can't the traditional security team
Yeah.
and the traditional security stack handle that? What makes you the right place?
I would put what is the traditional stack for an executive personally? I'm asking, like, what do you think it is?
For executives' personal communications?
Correct.
I don't know.
What I would say is that like the status quo today for 90% of executives that we work with is what I would call the implicit outsourced model. They are assuming that Apple, American Express, Google, all of the major tech companies
Everyone else is
spend on
taking care of
security.
it, yeah.
Correct. But it's siloed within their individual products. And what I would tell you is that I do not think that implicit outsource model is sufficient in 2026 for a number of reasons. But like, that is my firm belief, is that no matter where you are on sort of the economic ladder or in what I care about, which is the risk ladder, is that I do think that we will be thinking much more about how do you put Ryan at the center of that equation, not the product, to minimize risk. Because Ryan doesn't care if he has Gmail or Yahoo and his email is compromised. Does he really care whose fault it is? Like, he cares that his email was compromised. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of our view, is that we should be thinking about Ryan at the center of that equation, not the product. The reason why I don't think companies can do this well is I think, number one, there's a privacy issue. Executives are not excited about security teams being in their personal email, their personal computers, their personal home networks, etc.
But they're okay with outsourcing it to a startup?
It's a very, very important part of our model, is that our confidentiality is bound to the executive. It's the only way the model works, is if they think they are going to get the right expertise without risking their job. It's critical, right? The classic example we give in this case are the LinkedIn job scams. You are not going to call the security team and say, I got phished because I was taking an interview, or I thought I was taking an interview for another job. You're going to be very hesitant to bring that to the security team. Now, does the security team want to help? Of course they do. But if you're not going to bring it to them, then what's the answer? Right? And so again, like we think like the privacy element is tremendous, that people can get the support that they need, CISOs sleep better at night knowing that they have this type of response mechanism in the event that something bad happens. I'll also just say, in most cases, they're not actually going through a serious incident, right? It's benign. It's something they can safely ignore, something that's a non-issue. Even just getting that peace of mind that I'm okay is something that's very, very valuable to the executives to get back focused on work and being productive.
And not burning his own time behind it.
Correct. But we can also see executives make it worse, right? Where they are convinced that there is a bigger problem than there is. And I would say 90% of cases, we are simply telling people, you're right to bring it up. This is never going to make it anywhere but the privacy of this conversation. But here's why we think you're okay. Feel free to keep, business as usual.
Right. How paranoid do you get? I mean, when you're passing on advice to folks, do you get paranoid are there certain scores that generate things that say, leave your phone, don't bring a phone into this place, use a Faraday bag, for instance? Like, I don't know. How paranoid do you get when you get to the level of these executives who have not only identity theft and cyber criminals, but you have APTs targeting? It can get really serious.
I think it's one of the advantages of our model is that it's not one size fits all. And so I think number one is that coefficient that I explained before, is that it's about right sizing the amount of friction that is warranted given their score, right? Given their actual risk level. I think the second thing is also being honest about what friction they're willing to endure. Some people are not, right? Like we want to meet them where they are. The worst thing is when a security or a privacy recommendation is given and it's just not used. But
how do you ensure that though? Because that's what the security team is dealing with right now, right?
Correct.
You're coming in to provide some solve to the security team. How do you get the CEO? How do you get these executives to pay attention?
I think there's two things. Number one is communication, right? We are very, very, very deliberate in how we communicate to make sure two things. Number one, we are not perceived as alarmist. If you lose credibility because you're telling people the house is on fire every day, they're going to zone you out. And so you have to be judicious and pick your spots as to when you're actually asking for their time, when you're asking for their attention, and when you're asking for them for friction, right? And I think that there's a little bit of an art to that. I think the second thing is you have to listen. Like, you can't just beat everybody with the same stick and say, you need a YubiKey, you need a YubiKey, you need a YubiKey, because it's not going to happen, right? Like, you have to meet them where they are. I think the other thing is that we incentivize. Like we truly do make it so that they feel that we're in their corner and we want to help protect them and their family, right? The company understands that we are doing this to minimize the likelihood that this comes home to roost for the security team. But in a lot of ways, it's a win-win. The CISO sleeps better at night knowing that avoidable problems are being proactively dealt with, and the executives sleep better at night knowing that there is someone who's actually taking an interest in keeping them safe. We also think in a lot of ways it's a great message for executive compensation packages, right? For HR to be using, we take care of our people to such a level that we are even thinking about your cyber risk outside of the company.
Make it a recruit part of your recruitment pitch. Will help take care of all your private communications.
We cover, at every public company we work with, we always cover the head of HR. And when we sort of frame it to them that way, that this is something you can even close candidates on as like part of the candidate experience or part of like the executive compensation package, the light bulb goes off in their head because it's almost like, hey, we're giving a gym benefit. We give travel credits. We give all these sorts of perks. We even give you personal cybersecurity benefits. To again, obviously it's selfish for the company, right? It helps the company stay out of trouble. But there's also almost like a perk for the executive in that way that they're not going to get their previous company.
Well, let's linger there for a second, because that's also in my mind is this B2B to C sales motion, right? Your buyer is the CISO or the security team. That's your buyer. The user is not that either of them. It's a CEO or a board member or someone else. Can you walk me through like what a real deal looks like? Like who champions it internally? What's the typical objection you have to overcome when you're dealing with this? You're selling to one person, but you're dealing with someone else.
The CISO is not going to let an external vendor touch their CEO without them looking at it. So like I can promise you, like, yes, we do deal with sometimes someone who's not quite the CISO, but the CISO has to approve of it. So there's no question they are our first champion.
So there's your first champion, right?
I would say there are several other stakeholders that we end up running into. Number one can sometimes be a function called executive protection. So actually historically was a physical kind of bodyguard type role, which is, again, not an insignificant area of spend for companies. Obviously, the United Health incident from a couple of years ago, there was a tremendous uptick in spend on physical security for executives, but we actually think there's a very close sort of cyber relationship to those types of cases where executives being targeted, right, being profiled online can lead to sort of physical stuff. So we'll often interact with like a physical security person who, again, will fall under this like executive protection budget that usually still falls under the CISO's budget. Famously, right, Facebook, I believe, is spending in excess of $25 million per year protecting Mark Zuckerberg personally because there are real world threats that, people of that level face. I would say the other constituency, probably we don't need them to close business, but they end up being a very critical part of like the ultimate sort of last mile here is executive assistants. It's a very, very underrated community of people that do a ton of work.
It should be high in your scoring model as well, right?
Correct. We do. There are certain companies we work with that sponsor the executive assistants because they do have access to personal accounts of executives. But again, I think they are very, very important insofar as you're delegating work to somebody. They have to be factored into your circle of trust and therefore very viable targets for attackers going after companies in this way.
What's a typical objection you run into? Like what would you say is a friction point trying to get this sold inside?
I would say there are some companies that we speak to. The most common objection is it's just not the biggest priority. Like I think that's true for any enterprise sale is that there's so many different sort of vendors.
So many problems. This is like down the list, right? Yeah.
I think where the biggest counter argument we have for this, quite honestly, is that I think security professionals oftentimes will struggle to have executives who are in charge of their budgets really understand the nitty-gritty of what they do and why something is important. I think we help them in that capacity. If a CISO is telling that someone who's approving their budget that I want to allocate some small percentage to make sure that you personally are taken care of, number one, it's almost seen as a positive, right? It's like, oh, I'll happily approve that. The second thing is that when we make security selfish for these executives, it actually improves the relationship between CISOs and the executives as they understand these concepts. You would be surprised at how many senior executives do not truly understand what multi-factor authentication is when you press them on it. Like if you gave them a type of, exam. Said, explain to me what multi-factor authentication. Now, when you actually deliver it for them and you bring it home and they have to use it to get into their personal email, now I understand why it's important for the organization to have multi-factor. And it just makes the conversations with CISOs that much easier. They're leveling up the collective understanding of basic security concepts because you've made it selfish. And that is like great for security culture within companies. Great.
I imagine in heavily regulated industries, that's probably a better sweet spot and an easier sell for you. Can you talk a little bit about where you're getting traction? Is there certain industries, certain categories?
Yeah, we have three segments. On the public company side, there's two of those three segments. Number one is consumer brands. So companies where consumer sentiment is very, very, very closely tied to sales and growth, et cetera. You can easily see companies being boycotted because they hired somebody or because they've, taken some stance on something or other. Where there is a premium to protect reputation as it impacts the company, I would say that is definitely a segment that people are very interested in working with us. Those executives also tend to be very visible. And so like they have larger sort of outsized profiles, if you will. I would say that's segment number one. Segment number two, as you said, is heavily regulated. This is actually very important because CISOs in a lot of cases want to help executives personally, but they actually can't. They are worried that they might be overstepping a compliance line, where if they were to step outside of the corporate environment, are they actually breaking some sort of SEC regulation? I'm sure you remember several years ago, a lot of the banks paid big fines because executives were doing sort of deals on WhatsApp, right? They were using WhatsApp to actually conduct business and they paid historic fines to the SEC. So where there exists that, okay, I'm a CISO, I want to help you, but I'm not sure that I can, that's another great area for us. The third I would say is like more family office or investment firms, right? Where you see there's a very high ratio of like assets under management to headcount. And in that sense, like you do not have mature security organizations, even if a company could be moving 7-8 figures per month. For them, there's a real premium on protecting the executives who are responsible for, again, obviously the reputation stuff as well, but really like running the business.
Talk a little bit just to linger on the business side of it here. Is there a mid-market version of this? Like you're focused on the C-suite. Is there a path to cover VPs or below? What is the economics of a concierge service make? Does that make it impractical?
You can't, I don't think you can deliver what we deliver at that price point. And so I'm sure there are things that exist, but at the end of the day, it's the last mile that matters, right? Again, the human component. If you take One Medical as a corollary that we use, or any of the telehealth companies, people want the human being at the end of the day, right? Like AI helps. We're very, very bullish on what it can do for productivity, what it can do to understand risk, et cetera. But like I think that's what people want, is they want someone to talk to when they're in their moment of need, right? When they really have a question that could really make or break their day, week, or month, et cetera. And I just don't think you can offer that at a very, affordable price point today. Now, we hope in the future, because we're, in a lot of ways, we think of our company like Tesla, where we want to build this is our fancy sports car, but it's really an R&D machine, right? The score came out of this, our care planning infrastructure came out of this, right? Like we want to be able to eventually scale down to lower price points to the VP director level, and hopefully offer something for entry-level employees at some point. Right. But I think the worst thing you could do is oversell,
people, right? Yeah.
Just be dishonest about it and then people get hurt, right? So we know where we can make a difference today. We're laser focused on that. But again, I think in the future, I mentioned the sort of implicit outsource model. Like we think that this is like car insurance in 10 years, that everybody will be doing something for personal cybersecurity and online privacy. And I would say today it's probably 10 to 20% of Americans max.
I was hoping to get through this interview without mentioning AI, but since you brought it up, I want to just flag one small thing that pops into my mind. There is this escalation of deepfakes. We're starting to hear stories of executives falling victim to deepfake-powered impersonation that kind of becoming more mainstream. Whether you believe it or not, it's like a real thing out there. How do you address threats that go beyond traditional phishing and some of the traditional things into some of these AI-generated things? And is that even in your wheelhouse today?
Yeah, I mean, I'll like without getting into anything specific, obviously, like what I will say is what I think about AI by and large, and I know you guys have spoken about this on the podcast, I think by and large, it is making a big difference for attackers to either scale or reduce the cost of existing attacks. And so I do think there is like kind of the sci-fi stuff that we should be worried about, deepfakes among many others.
Right, but it's lower down. Yeah.
Again, it happens. We've seen it, but the thing that we are much more concerned about is if a certain attack cost X 5 years ago, it costs 10% of X to deliver today. And for us, it's really just putting all the things that you've been hollering about for 20 years to be much more realistic today. I mean, if you look at the statistics, which we believe are incredibly underreported, right? Like, what does it really tell you? It tells you that like there's more attacks, they're happening more frequently to more victims per year, right? And I think that's just because attackers are just more efficient at delivering tried and true methodologies, right? It used to be that grammar, right, was a very easy way for people to suss out these types of attacks.
Yeah, doesn't exist anymore. Yeah.
It doesn't exist anymore. Every phishing email is written in perfect English, right? And I think that's like just a great like corollary for what we think is happening today with AI, where it's just scaling, right? It's democratizing known, attack types to more and more petty criminals. And again, I think executives who have stayed the same, right? Individuals who have stayed the same in the last 5 years have gotten relatively much worse.
Jeremy Bannon from the cyber health company. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan.